Yo, what's up folks, MTG here, and in this video I'm going to go through how impactful Explorer Anthology 2 has been. It's been about a month since the set came out. We've had quite a while to adapt to kind of see new decks crop up, and so we're going to take a look at each of the cards in turn and go through kind of how much it's getting played, whether it's got a bunch of different homes or archetypes it's getting played in, how much of an impact it's had on the meta, or maybe it's a card that needs more help or is a potentially complete dud. And we'll see, as like obviously we're going to get more cards added to the format this year with Shadows Remastered. Maybe we get another anthology later on in the year, maybe we get something like RTR Remastered. Maybe being hopeful on my own part there, but there's a bunch of cards from Return to Ravnica block which I'd love to be added to the format. But yeah, I'm going to go through each of the cards a ton and kind of do a bit of a breakdown on how well they've impacted the format. Kicking it off with the colourless cards, and I'm going to start off with my old friend Thought Not Seer. A very potent card, one that saw a ton of play, what was in Standard, and it has seen play in Modern. One could argue actually that it's more playable in Modern with the likes of Eldrazi Temple than in Pioneer. Unfortunately, Explorer, it's not really found its home. I've seen it crop up in a couple of lists. I've had it cast against me a couple of times on ladder from different builds of kind of white devotion type things. But it's not really crept up that much, and it's not found its way into any kind of mainstream, like pillar archetypes. And while I think that it could get more support, maybe we get something like Wasteland Strangler, that kind of enable some kind of Black Exile based Eldrazi deck. I don't think it's got a lot of hope. As the format gets closer to Pioneer, as more cards get added, it kind of squeezes the space down a little bit. I think now's probably the best time for Thought Not Seer to shine. I actually do have a deck with it in coming out fairly soon, but unfortunately it's not had very much of an impact on the format. I'm going to give Thought Not Seer a 3 out of 10 because it's still seen a little bit of play. Alright, so Thought Not Seer has two other colourless friends as well, and the first of those is Kozilek the Great Distortion. 8 colourless is a pretty oppressive casting cost. It's fairly hard to cast, but I thought it might make a break into something like Green Ramp. There is a colourless ramp deck on the very, very outskirts of the format where you can play Kozilek, but even there are still really, really good things to do already once you have all that mana in play. Like, if you're casting it on Kozilek a lot of the time, you'd rather just be Ubermogging people. But access to like counter spells is something that you don't normally get in traditional ramp decks. And I thought maybe it'd make a sway into green. Maybe that colourless ramp deck gets good enough. Unfortunately, other things have really happened. Obviously, green's had tons and tons of support, some of which we'll get to in a minute, but also a ton of new tools over the last few sets as well, just like regular sets that have come out. So I'm going to give Kozilek a 1 out of 10, unfortunately. I love the cards, and in something like Historic Brawl, I think it's really awesome to have a legend like this. Some people may disagree, but I'm really judging on impact to Explorer itself, and like fringe, like kind of colourless ramp deck, I like out in Dantooine something, so yeah, a 1 out of 10. Mana Reshaper is a tricky one. It being 3 mana, it really works in its favour. You can play it on turn 2 off of a mana creature. You can collect a company into play, but still, it's not really found a great home. With that being said, because it is just so much easier to play than Kozilek, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. I think it's still got some potential. I think a shell can be found for it. And so, yeah, I'm going to rate it slightly higher. It really does pain me to rate those 3 that low. I love all those cards dearly, but unfortunately, it kind of is what it is. If you're like, hey, I disagree, I think it's really good here, then let me know in the comments. And at the same time, while you're at it, if you're interested in Explorer content and stuff, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. So, moving on to white cards, and I guess still kind of a colourless one because, you know, it's got Devoid on it, but Eldrazi Displacer. This is probably my most played card on the list in like paper. While I was in Standard, I played a ton of Bank Company with it. Eldrazi Displacer is a very power level effect, and it's one that's seen more play than the other Eldrazi cards on this list. Whether that's in like mono white Yorion, green white Yorion, and more play than Thought Not Seer seen in those other types, I should also note. But also, as I mentioned, in kind of Bank Company type shells, I've also seen it in some red-white lists. Card does something fairly unique. The other thing that helps it is obviously it costs less than 3 mana. It can come into play off of Collected Company or Kyle's Reconstruction, which does also help it out. But yeah, Eldrazi Displacer has seen an alright amount of play. Not a ton. And so this really does hurt. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. Those still aren't top tier, like tier 1 decks, right? It's not impacting the upper echelon, the kind of like tier 1 of the format. Alright, the next card on the list is Eerie Interlude, and this one... Yeah, this one's fairly easy. I'm going to give it a 0 out of 10. It's not seen any play in Explorer, not something that's on its own powerful enough to warrant a card in some of these matchups. People always think about these effects like, oh, you can dodge a Wrath with them, but you need to like have this 3 mana instant to hold up, have enough things on the board to press them into Wrath. It's just so situational that it's not seen any play. Now, again, something like Gladiator, Historic Brawl, it's a really, really cool card, but sadly, for Explorer, I'm going to rate it a 0 out of 10. Feel free to at me in the comments, I'm sorry if you've got something you really like it, but I'm afraid it's going to be a no from me. Brave the Elements is a super powerful card, super powerful effect, and is integral, absolutely integral to the mono white deck, and it's moved it from kind of like a tier 2.5, tier 3 even, to being a tier 1 deck in the format. It's obviously had some help with the form of Mutavault as well, which we will get to, but it's been integral in making mono white tier 1. Because it's only that one deck, it is a tier 1 deck though, and so I'm going to give Brave the Elements a 7 out of 10. Impacting the top tier of the format, and yeah. Okay, Soldier of the Pantheon's a tough one. If Explorer Anthology 2 released a few months earlier, then maybe it would have made an impact on the format. Unfortunately, the mono white deck now just has better cards to play, and I think this is one of those things that happens where you plan a set, and then you got another set coming out, and you don't really like look across them, and you're like, oh, actually, Soldier of the Pantheon doesn't need to be here. It's not really serving any purpose. It's in the format now. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 10. Just because it could have done. something recruitment officer. Unfortunate timing for Soldier of the Pantheon, really. And then the last white card is Ethereal Armor. Green-white, I can't quite say hexproof, and that's part of the problem. Green-white auras, and there are other versions of the deck as well. I've seen blue-white variants. Is a tier 2 deck in Explorer, really. It's got so many tools, but it's still missing a bit. We don't have Glade Cover Scout in Explorer yet, unfortunately. I think we might wait, or end up waiting quite a while for that one, as set-wise it's a little obscure. Maybe we get it in an anthology set later on the year. Maybe Wizards are like, we can leave that one off for a little bit. That can sit in the Dig Through Time Treasure Cruise category of cards that aren't super fun to play against. But hey, Ethereal Armor has been great. Again, it's kind of now only one deck, and unfortunately that deck is a little bit worse than, say, Mono White, which we just talked about with Brave the Elements, and so I'm going to give Ethereal Armor a 6 out of 10, because it has made quite a large impact on the format. Moving on to blue cards, starting off with Clever Impersonator. Card is very, very sweet. Card is super, super sweet. It's not really seen much play at all. I posted a Garuda list with it in, but that's... And it's good there. It's really good there. Gives you some extra lines of attack, but not quite good enough to kind of impact the the top couple of tiers of the format. The one thing going for Clever Impersonator is that it can be a very, very solid sideboard card, depending on what decks are popular in the format. Obviously, being able to copy anything is very, very powerful, and you might see it crop up as a 1 of or 2 of in some sideboards at any point in time. As far as a rating goes, it is still super niche, but because of that sideboard capability, the potential there, I'm going to give it the same rating as Thought-Knots here, and rate it a 3 out of 10. The other blue card from Explorer Anthology 2 is Dispel. And Dispel is a very, very powerful counter spell. Hey, 1 mana, counter target instant spell. It can be used as protection. However, it's not really cropped up in that many sideboards. And generally, this kind of card is reserved for sideboard play. Against very specific matchups for interaction versus specific things, different types of combos. As far as using it as a protection spell, we have other options. People have been valuing the flexibility of cards like Spell Pierce or Mystical Dispute, where you want interaction versus other blue decks, and even just like Negate, things like blue-white have access to Veto. There just aren't that many use cases for Dispel. However, if a certain type of combo deck becomes good in the format, then you might see it come back into play. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. Alright, moving on to black. Pseudoport Cutthroat might be my most played card from Explorer Anthology 2. It must be pretty close if it's not. It's a card that's not fit into a ton of different decks, but it has fit into some good ones. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I'm really a big fan of Black-Green Citadel, Jund Citadel. It also fits into there. However, it's not really found a place in like the Black-Red Sacrifice decks. It's not been played in the Black-Red Sacrifice decks in Pioneer, so that's not a massive surprise. But it does enable some Rally the Ancestors shenanigans, which is kind of a fringe deck. With that being said, Green-Black Citadel, which is I think or Green-Black or Jund Citadel, whichever way you decide to build it, are kind of both very similar, is still more of a tier 2 deck in the format. I think that it is a very strong meta call if you're facing a lot of decks that aren't very interactive, things like Mono Green, which when Explorer Anthology 2 came out, I think was the best deck in the format. I'm not sure if that's still the case, if things have developed a bit since then. And it is really strong there just to be able to make a fast Citadel and just kill your opponent if they don't have very much interaction. I'm going to give Zulaport Cutthroat a 6 out of 10. Card's great, and with a few more cards of the format, you might see other decks with it crop up. And it's a card that only gets better over time, really. Moving into reds, and number one of the red cards is Eidolon the Great Rebel. It's a card that presents really well. It looks great coming in. It's been great. The only thing I would say about Eidolon is that there are a few different ways to build the red deck. Whether you want to go with Obosh, even like the choice of playing Embercleave or not, is still up for debate. And there are a few different ways to build the red deck that don't necessarily include Eidolon. Card is obviously very good. Is a mainstay of the deck in Pioneer, and so I'm going to give Eidolon of the Great Revel a 7 out of 10, kind of put in the same category as Brave the Elements. Card's just amazing. Next we've got Fiery Impulse, and Fiery Impulse fits best in blue-red. In some kind of big red shells, I've seen it come up there as well, and there are a bazillion different ways to build blue-red. Whether you want to go in on a Young Pyromancer with Third Path Iconoclast, whether you want to play Creativity, whether you want to play Drakes, whether you want to play super aggressive with like Balmor aggro, though there you probably would not be playing Fiery Impulse. And so I think Fiery Impulse is a great card in the format, but hasn't seen as much play just because those blue-red decks are still missing some quite powerful tools. When Explorer Anthology 2 was coming out and we were getting spoilers, the big question for me was, are we going to get Treasure Cruise? Are we going to get Dig Through Time? We obviously didn't. Unfortunate. And it doesn't look like those cards are going to get added soon. And so Fiery Impulse, I'm actually going to give a 5 out of 10. If/when those cards are added, it'd certainly creep up a bit in my view. And yeah, I do add a bit for kind of potential. However, I am a bit worried that it's going to be a long time till we get those. Well, I think Wizards are kind of umming and ahhing it because I think they might get banned. They've always kind of been on that, they're a little unfair. Maybe they will get banned. Rending Volley is an excellent sideboard card, but is a sideboard card. But because it's being a sideboard card, it fits into a bunch of different decks, which adds like another kind of spin on things. And yes, a bunch of different red decks, sure. Great against Greasefang, great against Spirits, great against Angels. Yeah, card is brilliant, and so I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, which is a high rating for a sideboard card, I think. Getting into green with Courser of Kruphix, a card that is very near and dear to some people, myself included. I played it quite a lot when it was in Standard. However, it has not really made much of an impact on Explorer. It's a card that people have tried a lot in Pioneer. There are different variations of green, black, or Sultai, and it's just not found a home that has like remained good. There was a point where like we saw different Delirium type decks, which is something we don't really have in Explorer yet, but hopefully, hey, Shadows of Innistrad Remastered soon, come on. Yeah, I just want Traverse. That's, yeah, alright. But Course has not really made an impact. I don't think that like it's going to see more play going forwards, but it is still like a fringe thing. Like, it being an enchantment is important for certain types of decks. I'm afraid I'm going to have to give Corsair a 1 out of 10. I just don't see it kind of finding a way in. Say, a Wayfinder is a really interesting card. It's a card that, for a lot of time, Abzan Greasefang was quite reliant on, but has largely been replaced. The one kind of caveat to that is actually Eldritch Evolution, which, notably, we do not have in Explorer. Again, another Shadows of Innistrad Remastered thing that we're very much hoping for. It's a really cool card and fits into a bunch of different places. But until then, City Wayfinder's kind of found its way out of the Abzan deck. State Wayfinder also does a few other things. For example, it is a strong enabler for Dredge, but wait. Once again, Prized Amalgam is the key piece missing from Dredge. Again, waiting for Shadows of the Shredder Remastered. Dredge is kind of, because it's crisscrossing hate cards with Greasefang, which you kind of just have to bring something for, hasn't been that strong. And so, fits into two archetypes. One of them's really, really good, but doesn't always play it. One of them's a little out in the sticks right now, just because it gets just hosed by Graveyard Hate so badly. And so I'm going to give State Wayfinder a 5 out of 10. And it does occasionally crop up in other things as well. And you have to bear that in mind. Bit of a fun one with Worldbreaker. And I have actually had this cast against me quite a lot. More than I would have thought, honestly, coming into the format. It turns out there are a few different flex slots in the mono-green deck. Depending on who you ask, those are flex slots, and to other people, they're like, no, you should definitely be playing X amount of this card. Or Nissa, or whatever. But Worldbreaker is a really, really powerful one, because when you cast, it's a cast trigger firstly, and then exile Artifact, Enchantment, or land, and you can also recycle it if you've got that colorless land, which, oh wait, Nykthos just happens to be. And so, it's not in every green deck, by far not in every green deck, but it has cropped up there a bit. The other thing about it is, while it's not seeing that much play outside of green yet, there is potential later down the line if we get Kozilek's Return. That's a really, really powerful synergy. We've seen that come up a little bit in Pioneer too. Mono Green's so good that I want to rate this a bit higher. It's not seeing play in very many places, by which I mean just green, and even then, like, kind of fringe. Let's give it a 4.5. The last green card is Nylea's Presence, and this is a enabler for Demonian cards, and a really, really integral piece for Enigmatic Incarnation, which it didn't previously have. Incarnation's really, really good. However, kind of on the fringe of tier 1, really, in my opinion. And there's some debate to be had there. There are a bunch of different types of Fires decks. I think that Karuga Fires is the tier 1 version. I think Enigmatic Incarnation, at the minute, because there are still like a couple of pieces that are missing, sort of. At the minute, I'm going to give the Enigmatic variant a little bit lower. Like, both versions of the deck are good, but it's not quite tier 1 in my opinion. And Nylea's Presence isn't doing too much else, at least at the moment. That's the only real spot it's getting played. I'm going to give Nylea's Presence, because it is so integral to that deck. But yeah, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Alright, that leads us into multicolored cards, starting out with an old favourite of mine in Reflector Mage. Now, we have a lot of these style of effects in Pioneer and Explorer, and Reflector Mage fits in well in a couple of places some of the others don't. A human as well, and Wizard's also a relevant type. However, it's not made a big dent in the format. There are a couple of decks it fits into well, something like Bant Humans, which you watching this video may not have played against on ladder, and is not very popular. It also fits into Vanifar. Not a popular deck, is quite good, I will say. Both of those pretty on the fringe. I'm going to give Reflector Mage a 4 out of 10. Alright, Slither Hive Lord, again, suffers a little bit from no one's playing this. Not many people playing in Slivers. I've played against one Slivers opponent on ladder. I've played with Slivers prior to Hive Lord coming out, but I've not made a new video with them since. The instinct is to put it as like a massive L, right? Give it like a 0 out of 10, 1 out of 10. However, the Slivers deck is surprisingly effective. Not to say that it's breaking any holes open in the meta. In spite of that, the deck's best draws, you don't need the Hive Lord for. And we're still missing what is arguably the best Slither in Gale Rider Slither. The one that gives double flying. I'm going to give Slither Hive Lord a 2 out of 10. Obviously, it's pigeonholed into one archetype. It's good in that archetype, but the archetype is nowhere to be seen. Any Slivers players, shout out in the chat, please. Shout in the chat, shout in the comments. If Zilliport Cutthroat isn't my most played card on this list, Shame in the Pack is. Shame in the Pack, Shame in the Pack, Shame in the Pack. Elves, I would like to say, is tier 1. The deck is very, very strong. The deck's very, very powerful. It has some absolutely insane, unbeatable draws, but is more of a tier 2 deck. In the upper, upper echelons of tier 2, if you'd like to say that. But Shame in the Pack is integral to the deck functioning. There are some personal biases here, probably. Again, just that one archetype. But it is excellent. I'm going to give Shame in the Pack a 6 out of 10. And if that contradicts anything I've rated before, it's personal bias, I'm sorry. Which finally brings us on to lands. The lands here have been really, really important. And we're kicking things off with Mana Confluence, which is arguably the least played of these. It does enable some pretty, I wouldn't necessarily say degenerate things, but hey, it allows some decks that, hey, maybe you shouldn't be allowed to cast all those colours. So it enables something like Vannifar. If there are decks like Green-White Hexproof, where it lets you play a couple of off-color cards in your Hexproof deck, in the Auras deck, that is. And there you just need extra green sources that tap for green and white, because you need as many combinations of that as possible. In Boros Heroic, the red-white heroic deck, there too, there are a bunch of instances like that. There are also things like 4 or 5 color humans. Mana Confluence has been great, is going to be great, and yeah, it's just kind of there. I'm going to give Mana Confluence a 7 out of 10. It's going to continue to be great, and I hope eventually we get to mess around with Niv to Light shenanigans. Next up, we have Mutavault. Mutavault, obviously, the kind of ubiquitous creature land. Like, hey, you're playing a tribal deck, why not add some Mutavaults? We've played them in Merfolk. We've played them in Humans. Mono White Humans is obviously the premier deck with them in, and they fit in elsewhere as well. This is the first 8 out of 10 on the list. There's not a ton of to say about it. Right? It's good in like the creature type decks that we have at the minute. It's going to be good in the creature type decks that we have for a while, and kind of into the future and to infinity and beyond, if you like. And that brings us on to Nykthos. Oh, Nykthos. Is there a penalty for... I've not decided to add a rating for impacting the format in the worst way, but Nykthos has been absolutely astonishingly good. The green deck before was more tier 2, I think, but with Nykthos it's clearly become tier 1. It's still, I think, my kind of take for best deck in the format. There are just so many tools. Any holes you have can be filled up with Karn. Often you need the absolute perfect draw to be able to beat the deck. And they could just draw the wrong half of the deck, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I've got a Mana Elf, I've got like Wolfwill Haven and Kiora, and all your creature removal doesn't do anything. You still kind of have to leave your 1 mana removal spells in your deck, so you need to be able to deal with the Llanowar Elves still, with the Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic still, because they're just so powerful to start. Yeah. It does feel like the looming presence in the format. But yeah, obviously the main culprit is mono green, but then we've seen it come up in white, we've seen it come up in blue, I've seen red builds, I've seen black builds. The card's great, I've seen it in the Angels deck. I was going to rate Nykthos a 9, but I think because I've got no 10s here, I'm just going to rate it a 10. It's the best card in the set. It's had the most impact, and that will continue until, well, if they decide to touch it. I don't think it's going to get banned. I don't think it's necessary. We just need more of the other cards in the format. Which kind of brings us to the outro. How has Explorer Anthology 2 impacted the format? It's brought to life a bunch of new archetypes. A bunch of archetypes that were missing certain pieces, or were missing different support elements. But there's still so much work to do. I created a video about a month ago looking at what cards are missing after Explorer Anthology 2, and there are still like 3,871. Obviously not all those are meta relevant, but there are so many different pieces and archetypes that are still not really there in the format. We're going to get Shadows remastered. I think we'll probably get an Anthology set probably about the same time, but the problem is that these things are taking quite a long time, and I would like to play with them now. As would you, I'm sure. And that's kind of a little bit selfish, but also I don't really like that. I don't love that Wizards is kind of dragging it out. Obviously, they can't do everything at once, but I would like some of the more important pieces. For now, we've got to be a bit patient. I look forward to Shadows Remastered, and at some point soon, you'll likely see a Shadows wants list. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, let me know in the comments what you think about my kind of ratings and opinions here. If there's cards that you want to see, let me know, and what do you think about where the format's headed? But hey, cheers for watching, have a great day, pea soup.